Welcome to the next episode of the Be Ready Utah PrepCast. I'm Wade Mathews, the Be Ready Utah manager, and along with me today are Kathryn McMullin and Jeff Johnson, also with the Division of Emergency Management, outreach specialists. We have CERT trainers here. We've got safety officers. We've got a lot of knowledge and experience here today, and that's great because we're going to be talking about first aid. And this will be in two parts. We're going to talk about our day-to-day emergencies requiring first aid, and we're going to talk about our mass care, our large-scale disaster situations requiring first aid. But we're going to start with day-to-day, right? The stuff that most of us may see on a regular basis. So, what are some of the scenarios that we're thinking about for the day-to-day need for first aid?
Family trips, where you might be out on the road somewhere. We've talked about going to scout camps. We've talked about going to family reunions, places that you might be away from your home and yet need to apply first aid. And so day-to-day could be your home as well, obviously. But
I think in the summer too, we experience more time on the road, and so you have a higher odds of something like a car accident happening as you're traveling to all those events. And you could be with a large group, a youth conference, or you could be with your family, where you can experience events that require some first aid knowledge.
So what we do here at Be Ready Utah is talk about preparedness. And when it comes to first aid, we really need to be prepared, right? To deal with those scenarios that we just described and be able to provide the treatment that's necessary.
Sometimes you're only as good as your knowledge and your training and your experience and maybe the equipment you have with you. If you might need something to treat a specific injury. And so sometimes the knowledge that you have or the training that you received might be really, really important. I've come up on accidents when I was a police officer where there would be 30 people standing around and nobody was doing anything because nobody knew what to do. Mm-hmm. So it's good to be trained.
And so some good resources for training for the day-to-day, the average citizen. Obviously, the American Red Cross provides some great first aid classes, CPR classes, those types of things.
Community Emergency Response Teams is fabulous training. It's an 8-week course that will really get you up to speed on how to save people's lives, especially in medical incidents or disasters.
And the Department of Health has the Stop the Bleed courses, which are free, and they're great resources for dealing with life-threatening injuries.
Okay, so there's 3 good options right there for some very good, helpful first aid training. And there may be others, right, so that we're not thinking of. But so what are we looking for when we're talking about providing first aid? How do we save the lives? We're going to be looking for the 3 killers, right? Sure. What are the things that can kill people in a short time if they don't get treatment?
You've got your airway, your bleeding, and your shock. We learn about that in disaster medical with our CERT training. And they are what you really need to treat first and foremost. They need to be prioritized to whatever injuries you're dealing with and dealt with swiftly.
You might want to treat those sequentially. Open the airway because that's the most important thing to do first. Get their airway open and get them breathing. And then stop blood loss. Blood loss is the next thing that will kill them very quickly. And no matter what the injury is, I don't care if it involves airway or whether it involves bleeding, always treat for shock, which means you want to elevate their feet, you want to cover them and keep them warm, and you want to keep a good check on their pulse and, if you can, their blood pressure.
And of those 3, airway, bleeding, and shock, or ABS, the airway may not be so obvious, unless you're looking really closely, they're not breathing. Bleeding is obviously obvious, but shock is also, it can be kind of a surprise, sneak up on us type of a killer, right?
Learning to identify the signs is very important with shock, sure.
So those are the 3 killers, and those classes that we identified can help us learn how to treat those. Yeah. We're not going to go into detail for the purposes of our PrepCast on teaching people this first aid, but knowing how to do those is critical.
And knowing how to do a good body assessment to check for bleeding. Sometimes you can miss bleeding. I had a friend of mine who fell off a motorcycle, had a compound knee fracture, wearing chocolate brown pants. We didn't see the blood. So you need to be aware that you're checking very thoroughly for injuries.
Well, and I think something that is important when you are doing those trainings that's been relevant to my family is there are different types of bleeding. It's not all that simple. And so just understanding that the types of spurting, gushing, or oozing make a difference in how you're treating and how much pressure to put on it. And so
and really how quickly they can die.
How quickly,
if
1
it's
liter
not
of
treated.
blood.
Right, 1 liter of blood and they can lose their life. And so, if it's hit an artery, it's spurting, and that's important to be able to assess that situation.
Great. Now, we know what can kill us, and we know we need to get the training for that, but what kind of equipment should we have to be able to provide first aid. Some good first aid kits. We've got some great samples, some examples here on the table in front of us. But what are some things that are just everybody should have?
I think the most basic thing you should have is Curlex and gauze.
Curlex is rolled gauze.
And it looks like this. It is
rolled gauze.
Rolled gauze and something like that to put around so you can stop bleeding. And the gauze, the 4x4s or 2x2s would go into the wound, and then you would seal it off with one of these. Something else that can really help is something like this. It's an Israeli bandage. If anybody wants to look on YouTube, just type in Israeli bandage and look for the guy who's kneeling down that has camouflage pants on. 3-minute video shows you how to use this. This allows you to put pressure on a wound and not have to stay there and maintain pressure. Very, very good, $6-7 item that everybody should have in their first aid kit if you come across a bleeding wound.
Because it has a chemical in it that clots the bleeding at the same time as the pressure is being applied, right?
Yes, it does.
Something else, Kathy, you mentioned stop the bleed, and one of the things that they emphasize there is applying tourniquets.
Right.
How many of us have a good tourniquet with us?
Right.
I mean, we can improvise with belts and ropes and those types of things.
And that's part of the education piece. Can you improvise? And you should have you have some good tourniquets that you really like.
I do.
Right?
They're out here on the table. There's a Cat T tourniquet, which is a military cat tourniquet, which has a windlass that tightens down after you seal it with a Velcro. There's another one, just a long piece of rubber, that's called a SWAT tourniquet that you can stretch and tighten and tie. But tourniquets are very, very cheap and really big lifesavers. And you can put a tourniquet on, and they're now finding out through some of the military applications, tourniquets can remain on up to 10 or 12 hours and not damage the limb.
And where should we be keeping our first aid kits and our first aid supplies? Have one in the car?
Sure.
One in the house, in the garage, or someplace?
You know, I think
else?
it's important when you're planning to first consider what you're planning for and then determine where you're going to keep it. My one that I have in the car, and I think that a lot of moms will go and buy, or families, they go and buy a kit without really understanding how to use what's in it.
Yes.
Or they ended up with a kit that they thought was expensive, and when they really looked into it, it was a lot of Band-Aids, it was a lot of alcohol prep pads and things that weren't necessarily going to help with that life-saving situation. So our family put together our own. It's just a makeshift. You can see my little Rubbermaid container, and included are lots of gauze. First of all, I have the ability to help others, so I have my gloves, my personal protective equipment, my masks. And then I have different forms of gauze, and I have a baggie with large rolls of gauze, and then the ability to splint a wound. Sometimes you just have to stabilize something that's broken or hurt, or you don't know if it's broken, so you stabilize no matter what. So there's ACE bandages, the ability to put some, like you were saying, the iodine helps in case of infection. But I made my own little kit because I wanted to be able to stabilize what I felt was the life-saving or life-altering injuries, not necessarily Band-Aids and tweezers.
My wife, Kristen, has done the same thing. She built our own little first aid kits and put them in each of our vehicles. So when we're out on the road, you know, the accidents or camping or whatever, we've got a first aid kit in each of the vehicles.
This is one I keep under my desk at my office.
Okay.
And I think you ought to keep one under your desk at your office. That has a lot of what Kathy has in here. It's very, very similar and can treat almost any kind of an injury. I also put this little one together. This is one that just sits by my back door. I can grab this if I'm jumping in a car with somebody else or going somewhere else that I'm not in my own car, and this can go with me. And honestly, there's everything in here I need to treat a life-threatening wound until help can get there.
Okay.
And that's one of the things we were talking about before. We need to understand that we are the help until help arrives. And so you need to have at least enough training and at least enough equipment to be the help until real, actual first responder help arrives. And that doesn't matter where you're at. We've talked about all the scenarios of being on the road, vacation, but you need to be ready to take on the responsibility of saving somebody's life, both with knowledge and with equipment, and it's basic equipment. Kathy, what'd you spend for this?
Oh, I don't know, maybe $10 to $15 maybe, versus some of the big kits.
A dinner night out with your family.
Right.
And yet you could save somebody's life with that.
And on that note where you're saying, where do you keep it? We had a recent experience in which my daughters got into a car accident, and they had their first aid kit in their emergency pack in their car, which they should have with them. And what they learned was when that car was significantly damaged, getting to that trunk was suddenly a problem, and they had a bleeding injury. And so one of the lessons we learned after that was we actually moved the first aid kit itself into the center console of the car so that it was very easily to access versus having to get into her pack, which was great that she had it. It was loaded. It was there ready to go. But when that trunk was crushed, how do you get to it? So they improvised with other materials and moved their stuff to where they could reach it.
And ingenuity is a big part of first aid. You may not have gauze and Kerlix, but you can use a rope and some towels or a sweatshirt or anything that you open your trunk and look in there. That you can be really ingenious.
Creative about
Creative.
Like the movies, tear the sheets, start tearing the sheets.
That's right.
So Kathy, really quick, we're about out of time here, but I wanted you to kind of summarize. You mentioned the car accident, which is a great example of a day-to-day emergency requiring first aid, and your daughters had that first aid. Well, they could get to a first aid kit somewhat, but how did that turn out for them?
It was an amazing experience. It's something you don't want your kids to go through. They went through it without me. No matter how much we plan for, we know what to do and we can save them. They were without me. And when that situation happened, they got into a really bad car accident. They had some bleeding that happened, and it helped in one of a few ways. First of all, they were able to assess. I mean, a 15-year-old girl looked at another 15-year-old girl and said, okay, it's not spurting, it's not gushing. I think we're okay, but we need to put pressure on it. We don't want it to get into your eye. Just having that information handy, even though help was on the way, they were close nearby help, to be able to take charge of that situation and feel like they were empowered to do something and have the confidence to react. I think it also helped them to stay calm. They knew what questions to ask. They didn't feel like they were a victim in the situation. They were a responder. Even though she was 15 years old and 17 years old, they were helping each other. It was wonderful that we had been through and had those conversations, those trainings together. We took CERT as a family. We know Stop the Bleed. I'm always quizzing them. They think I'm crazy. And they were so grateful to have that knowledge and to respond and help each other. And the responders that responded to the accident were amazed and impressed with what they did before they even got there.
Well, thank you.
If I may, mental preparedness is really important in this. I had experiences where I had nurses already on the scene when I showed up as a police officer. I've had nurses who actually backed away and said, I don't know what to do. They were nurses of 17 or 18 years. And then I've had other nurses walk up when I've been working on somebody and tell me I'm doing it wrong, because they were prepared and ready to step in and help with these kind of things, and I would step back and say, show me how to do it. But sometimes mental preparedness, it doesn't mean just because you're a nurse doesn't mean you're going to be good at this. You have to be ready for this.
Right. Thank you for those stories. These were kind of just touching the tip of the iceberg here when we're talking about first aid. Go out, get that training, go out, get those first aid kits, and get some experience and confidence. All right. We're going to wrap it up here with part one. We're going to continue this discussion in part two, our next Be Ready Utah PrepCast, talking about first aid for mass care disaster situations. So check us out on our YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter, and BeReadyUtah.gov. Thanks for watching.
Hey, hope you enjoyed this episode of the Be Ready Utah PrepCast. Like what you're seeing? Have a question about anything related to emergency preparedness? Or do you have a comment about something you've learned as you make a plan or get a kit? We'd love to hear from you. Comment or reply to us on Twitter or Facebook at Be Ready Utah with hashtag BRUPrepCast or in the comments on YouTube. We'll talk about it on one of the next episodes of the Be Ready Utah PrepCast. Don't forget to share these videos and your own adventures in preparedness with your friends, family, neighbors, and coworkers, because anytime is a good time to talk about emergency preparedness. See you next time.